Well, hello, hope you're doing well. My name is Sats, and you're joining me for episode 4 of the podcast Thought Club, which is really just, trying to unpick some of the thinking that we find in our culture today, understand why we think what we think and what we should think, and trying to bring some common sense, reflection, and rationale. And the reason thinking is so important is because your thoughts shape your behavior, your habits, and ultimately your character, who you become. But not only that, your experience of the life around you. And I personally want to make sure that I'm traveling through this life with the right sort of thinking so that I can absolutely live this life to the max and enjoy it and make the best kind of impact that I can on the few days that we have. So today we're in episode 4 and we are talking about pride and privilege. Pride and privilege, and I think that word privilege is one of the words that has kind of crept into society, maybe the last few years, 5 years, something like that, has really become quite a mainstream sort of staple of a word. And, I want to really unpack what that means for us. Clearly, some people have more privilege than others. Clearly, some people are more disadvantaged than others. But what we're seeing is that there are a set of implications or assumptions about what should happen about those privileges. And that's really what I want to look at today. I want to look at this idea of pride and privilege. Pride will come into it in a moment. So what comes to mind when you think about privilege? Well, there are some obvious kind of catchphrases that are talked about in society. White privilege being one of them, male privilege being another, maybe a little bit more obscurely, but still there, heteronormative privilege. This idea that there are privileges in our world, and let's be honest, there are. Let me just jump straight in there and say, okay, white privilege. If you are not white and you live in the UK, where I am, or the US, or somewhere else where most people are white, does that put you at a disadvantage? Yeah, I think it does. I think when you are different from other people, and that's another step to overcome. And then there's all the historical side of those things as well. So yeah, absolutely, privilege is real. And I think, but for me, the question is not if privilege is real, because it really seems quite obvious. It's what do we do about privilege? And if we're going to look at privilege, are we going to look at all privileges? Or are we going to select the privileges that are maybe more highlighted to us? And, on the face of it, that makes sense, doesn't it? We all see our own disadvantages much easier than we're going to see other people's disadvantages. But if we're going to include this as our train of thought, our way of thinking, that perhaps, and this might be what is socially being considered right now, that, hey, privileges are, okay, they're obviously good to some extent, but maybe the way they got there, maybe that's not good, and maybe we need to address or change these privileges and try and even up society to help people who are more disadvantaged. And the reason this is such an attractive idea is because who doesn't want to do that? Who doesn't want to help people who are more disadvantaged? And so you kind of come up with this false sort of dichotomy where if you're not a fan of addressing privileges, then you're really a terrible human being. At least that's what's communicated. And of course, everybody does want to do that. It's just maybe the approach in how we do that needs to be talked about, needs to be questioned. And I'm seeing that a lot in our culture right now, that there's almost like a kind of sacred cow or an idol comes up and says, hey, this is a golden thing. You can't come against this. Who doesn't want people who doesn't want people to be happy? If you don't want people to be happy, then you're just a terrible person. And sometimes it's just the question and the conversation is about what actually makes people happy. But no. If you want to attack my happiness, then you must be against me. And sometimes that's just not true. And so as we come into this conversation around privilege, I want to just take a moment, first of all, to examine the full range of privileges. So, and by the way, these are complex, these are nuanced, these are, there are a lot of privileges in our world. So I wanted to start with one that I've got, which is the privilege of being tall. And, I always think that you really kind of value something, a privilege, if you didn't always have it, but now that you do. And that was definitely the case for me. I was like short to average for like most of my life until I hit about 15, and I just suddenly shot up, and I'm now 6'3". Don't know what that is in metric, but I'm tall. I'm taller than your average person. And let me tell you that there are privileges attached with being tall. People look to you. I mean, literally, they look up to you, but there is a sense of you know what you're doing. There is a sense of, you know, confidence and trust is put in you on the basis of being tall. And then you have all the practical advantages, you know, shelves and you know, being able to reach things, and gigs. Gigs are the best. Like, you're just there thinking, sorry guys, you can't see, but I can see above you. It's an awesome thing. There's that sense of, you know, I think you're less likely to be mugged or attacked or, you know, come into conflict because people just assume you're tall, so you're probably stronger. Whether that's true or not, I don't know for myself, but it's an assumption. It's a privilege that carries through in my life today, and probably at some point in my life I will lose that privilege as old age comes in. I know I'm 33, so it's a little while away, but it's coming for us all, and some of us will lose some of those physical. We could talk about, you know, the privilege of being good looking. And, you know, again, for myself, I feel like I didn't really, I mean, let me just say, I think I've done all right. And the thing is that it opens up things. People, when you smile more, when people like the way you look, you know, it does open up things. Let's just be honest about it. It is a privilege. And here's the problem we have, though, is that we tend to look at the privileges that we don't have. And, you know, so often people who are average to good looking don't realize that they have the privilege of being average to good looking. If you are fully just kind of a healthy, sort of normal, you know, like you don't have a specific illness or disease or something, a disability, then that's an incredible privilege. And you never think about that until you meet somebody who is walking through a different thing, and that's huge. That's a genuine disadvantage, and that's a genuine privilege. And so here's what I'm just kind of seeing is that privilege is often the things we don't see. And so what about, for example, technology? So right now I'm filming this on technology that is there's access to technology that is powerful, that is capturing me, giving me the ability to communicate. You too are watching this on some sort of device, whether that's TV or listening to this in your earphones. And here's what you need to understand is that all of these devices that we are watching, interacting with, that they're made somewhere in a factory. No matter how good we think the supply chain is, every Apple product made in China, somewhere in small print, designed in the States, made in China. And we are using devices that are directly profiting from people who are oppressed, people who are working for almost no money. That's why it's outsourced to China. Why? Because it's cheap labor and people are not getting paid as well. The conditions are not maybe 100% regulated. And we could track this through every part of our lives, from clothing to food to, you know, even if you think of the plumbing in your house, well, where did those pipes come from? If we look hard enough and if we consider the full range of privilege, we are always going to find that we are privileged individuals who are benefiting off the oppression of others, the disadvantage of others. And here's why that's so important, is because I think for me, it's a reset so that we don't only look at the disadvantages we have and the privileges of others, but we actually look at ourselves and we say, you know what? I've got some privileges here. I've got ahead on the backs of others, and I think that's a reset to this whole conversation on privilege. Now, does that mean that we can't speak out on other issues and work towards other things? No, of course not. But what it does mean is if we want to truly consider what is now called in postmodern circles as intersectionality, which is the idea that, you know, if you have a certain privilege or lack of privilege, then that's one thing. But then if you have two disadvantages put in one thing, then that's a thing in itself. And you know, typical examples might be like, hey, if you are female rather than male, then you have a disadvantages. There's male privilege, and if you are not white, then hey, there's that in there as well. And so we can go down, and you can go super nuanced in that. But the idea is those kind of lack of privileges compound and essentially put you at a disadvantage. And then the implication is, of course, that society, the government, needs to do something about that to address those things. And if all I would say is, if we really want to apply that metric, that matrix, to our life in the way that we view how outcomes should work, how opportunities should work, to apply that, then we're really putting ourselves in trouble. We're not really thought it through, because every person who made the devices in a faraway country where I have no idea what the conditions are like, they should be the people who get lifted up, and I should be the one, and you should be the one who gets squashed down. We should be the ones who send our money somewhere else, and yet nobody wants that to happen. We're only looking at the scenarios where we directly benefit when this conversation is happening. And I think if you were to actually look at the true full matrix of it, I don't think that anyone's actually in favor of this. And so there is a bias implicit in this conversation around privilege that is designed against other people and doesn't look at ourselves. And that's where the question of pride comes in. Because when we look at others and we are essentially judging, saying, hey, you've got that privilege and I don't have that. And first of all, I don't know how you got that privilege, but you must have had that privilege from X, Y, Z. And I make assumptions about you. Some things are more obvious than others. Hey, you got those genetics from your parents, or you inherited that big house from your parents, or whatever it is. Like, okay, cool, that's your privilege. But when I look at your privilege and I say, well, the thing is that you've just had an easy life and wealth needs to be readdressed, or opportunities need to be addressed. It's really a very communistic idea that we need to reset society. Well, first of all, we've got to look at the implications of what that means for society. But secondly, we have to acknowledge the fact that not only are we going to get some stuff from other people, but we're also going to lose some stuff in the process. And nobody seems to have considered what that means. Everybody's really happy with taking other people's stuff. But what about when someone comes around and says, I need your phone because there's somebody in another world who doesn't have that phone? What about when you are the one who doesn't get considered in a job interview because of your access to technology? Do we really want to live in that sort of world? And I want to pull back just for a moment and talk about, if we were to or distribute wealth and opportunities and society and mix it up, how would we actually do that? And here's what I realize is that privilege is here to stay and disadvantage is here to stay. It is impossible to level out society. Let me just give you a really simple example. If I have an apple tree and you have an apple tree, and we're both, it's the same sort of level of healthy soil and whatever, but they're essentially exactly the same. And bearing in mind that life could never be reduced to this level of simplicity, just never, it never could. Now let's say two scenarios happen. When all the apples drop off my tree, I eat all the apples off mine, and you eat half of them, but you plant the other half. Well, within one generation, 2 generations of me not being wise with what I've got and you being very clever with what you've got, you've now got a whole orchard of apple trees. And my apple tree might have even died. It might have even just come to the end of its lifespan. And I have not prepared adequately for the next generation. Well, in 1 generation, 2 generations, 3 generations, however long it takes, if that trend continued, then my children would probably work for you. That's how it would work. They'd be like, well, we know apples, but we don't have any apple trees. So let's go work for you and serve you. And you see how inequality comes about very quickly. And you can say, well, it's all right for you. You inherited these apple trees from your parents. And the thing is that happens very quickly. Even if we were able to, level things out, you would instantly find that things change or life happens. And so how do we address that in a way that is fair? And everybody likes fair when it's about someone else, but when it's about them, we really don't have the lens to see how that applies to us. And so this conversation on privilege is a really important one, because implicit in the idea of privilege, particularly when we talk about, say, white privilege or male privilege, is the idea that we need to readdress. We need to fix something. We need to change something. Well, let me just say as well that I think that we need more nuance in these terms. So when we talk about white privilege, which is really just the idea that if you are white in a white majority country, your life is easier. And I think that I can get on board with. what I can't get on board with is the idea that we ignore all other privileges in the mix. And so, if you were white in a very poor, working class background, really disadvantaged compared to whether you are a wealthy immigrant, say, who has come in and you're not white. I mean, I just think you can't compare those two things. If you do compare those things, you need to put the whole list of complexities in the mix. And people rarely seem to do that. It just goes, well, you're white, I'm not, therefore, I should have opportunities that you don't. And I just think that just seems really too simplistic for me. I think you've got to look at the whole range. And then, of course, you've got the idea that really white privilege is not just about skin color, it's also about culture. There is a cultural privilege when you are part of a culture and you know how to fit in, you know how to interact, you understand the psychology. And that's something I've experienced having grown up mixed race between two cultures, never really feeling like I fit in, always feeling a bit other. And then just as I've grown up, being able to become fluent in the culture and seeing that change of experience for me personally, realizing I now have a cultural privilege that a lot of people moving into the country in the UK right now instantly don't have. And that is a privilege, but it's also a privilege you can learn. So there's a nuance there. Then you've got the privilege of language. That if you speak a language of a country of the majority, you instantly have a connection there. And I've experienced this again firsthand. We lived in Germany for 4 years and we moved there not really knowing any German. And instantly, I just felt so stupid. In every conversation that we had, I felt like people just think you're stupid. You try to speak your German, people just look at you funny. And I thought, wow, this is really eye-opening to what a lot of immigrants feel when they move to a country may not speak English very well or speak English with an accent. And that experience is a very real thing. Again, this is something you can change to some extent, which is awesome. But I think there's a lot of nuances. And then, of course, the history of racism and generational implications of stuff. That's also a massive thing as well that should be considered. But what I really don't like is I don't like the oversimplification of what these privileges mean. And I think it needs a much more nuanced conversation. It needs to be a lot less weaponized. And I think that's it. As soon as you look at somebody else's privilege and you go, oh, white privilege or male privilege, and you look at these things, instantly it's quite judgmental and instantly it's very prideful because you're not looking at maybe some of the logs in your own eye, but you're looking at the splinters, or maybe even if you look at a log, you're still seeing it for a splinter. So it's not a question of whether something is right or wrong or fair or unfair. It's just a question of the attitude of your heart. And what you tend to find is that the more you live with a sort of approach that is always judging others, always looking at others, seeing the worst in others, it really doesn't produce anything good in your own soul. Like, it doesn't make you happy. It doesn't make life better. It just makes you bitter. It just makes you angry and upset. And everybody else who is acknowledged privilege but is making their moves in life to sow into the next generation and sow into other people, we can feel pretty angry at those people. And that's a big conversation as well. And so I guess in closing, if I was to summarize, privilege is real. It's really here, but is it our job to fix up those privileges? Or are they simply what they are? I think a lot of them are malleable, a lot of them are changeable. And I think for me, as I think about my kids, or I think about the generation around me, or the friends and the people that I want to love and help in the next generation, I just think I want to give them every privilege that they've got. I don't want to take away from someone else, because at the end of the day, I can't. Even if I think that person absolutely does not deserve that, it's not up to me. Like, I don't get to decide that. Why do I get to decide that? What makes me feel proud enough to say I deserve that and they don't? Maybe neither of us deserve it. I just want to make sure that I leave as much as possible to the next generation, to my family, to my kids, to my church family, to the people that I love, to you. I want to sow into your life. I want to do everything I can to help humanity, the next generation. And I think that's an angle that really stops us from leaning into pride, our focus on others. And so I've got disadvantages in my life. I've grown up with certain disadvantages, but I try to avoid talking about them too much, not because they're not there, but because I never want other people to feel guilty or feel bad about what I've been through. Instead, I just want to help them. I want to help them go to the next level. And so I think that's really important to consider. I think the last final thing I would just say is I want to just talk about the language implications of this sort of terminology, because it really is commonplace to talk about white privilege or male privilege or whatever we want to put in there. And I think for me, it's just very unhelpful language. It's very blunt. It's like a blunt weapon to the head. Whereas what we need is a surgeon's knife to kind of just open some of this stuff and talk. And these terms don't actually help people. They don't help people make change. What they do is they encourage all of us to feel like we've been hard done by, encourage all of us to feel like there's no opportunity, encourage all of us to feel disillusioned with our lives. And so I actually think we need to resist the use of this language, or rather, not so much the use of it, but the social acceptance of it. Oh yeah, that's a thing. And we just nod because it's easier, because it's more comfortable, because we don't want to be awkward. And we also don't want to be perceived as, the big sort of names of being racist or homophobic or bigoted or whatever else comes at us in society. But I just actually think we need to have some courage. We need to resist using postmodern ideas. Unless you really do think that this is a great idea, then go for it. But I think when you actually drill down, it really doesn't work out too well for you. And you should be selling all of your Apple devices. Not even selling them. You should be giving them to, give them back to China. Give them back to the people who made them, who you've exploited to get to this point. I really think when you travel on this thought, it goes nowhere good, and it's very unproductive. They don't even want the stuff back, and it's just going to be quite complex to organize it. What about the environmental implications of setting stuff back? Anyway, you get the idea. This is a super complicated conversation, and we shouldn't just allow our news feeds to be populated with these super simplistic ideas. They do not serve people. So let's resist. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Thought Club. It's been episode 4, Pride and Privilege. Thank you so much for tuning in, watching. Hope you've been enjoying listening. And thank you to everybody who's been sharing this. Wow, I appreciate you sharing it, and maybe this will be helpful for someone. Maybe it will challenge someone's thinking. Please do keep sharing, and please subscribe if you would like to hear more from yours truly. Going to have some conversations lined up soon as well on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening into. Hope you have an amazing day. Big love, and we'll see you very soon.